Hey guys, it's Matt here, and I just wanted to talk about this spreadsheet that I found, which shows the BTC total circulating supply versus the Monero circulating supply over time. And so, as you can see, here's day one, which is 2014, April 18, which is the first day that Monero existed. And you can see that there was basically 0% of Monero, 0% of Monero was available at this time. And while it was day one for Monero, it was day 1966 for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin had released around 58.71% of its supply at this time. Okay, so this is 2014. Let's scroll up to the next major event. So the next major event is basically September 5th, 2015, where you can see essentially it's the um, it's the point where we essentially Monero reached 50% of its circulating supply out there in existence, or 50% of the original defined emission. The reason I say that is because when Monero first got created, it had a defined emission and then it had a tail emission point. The tail emission is the point where the inflation will approach zero but will never actually be zero. And we'll talk about that in a second, but basically, the defined emission is kind of the amount of Monero that was supposed to be released before the tail emission kicked in. Even though the defined emission kind of kicks in a little after the tail emission kicks in. Let's go on to the next event. So you can see here on day 706, it was Monero fork day for 2-minute blocks. Then day 917, which is October 20th, 2016. So here you can see that Monero passed below Bitcoin's initial absolute emission, and by that it means you can see the daily emission is 7,194 Moneros. And then if you scroll back up to here, the first day of Bitcoin being released, you can see there's 7,200 Bitcoins being released on the first day. Okay, let me go back to the calendar date I was just on. So, okay, on 2017, February 11th, we have the total emission percent crossover. We're basically, at this point, 75.71% of all Bitcoins have been mined, and 75.72% of all Moneros have been mined, but the day after this, more of the Monero is mined than of the Bitcoin, at least of the defined emission of Monero. Going on, you can see right here we have the third halving day. For one second, the third halving day, so the available supply is this. So when I say it's the third halving day, what I mean is not the halvings for Bitcoin, but halving means the first halving day would be 50% of Monero released. The next one will be 75%. The third one will be 87.5, and then the fourth one would be 93.75 or something like that. Then we go down, you can see there's a daily inflation crossover date. So at this point, the daily inflation is 0.0102, and here is 0.0102, 0.01026, and then here's 0.1025. So this is 2019. At this point in 2019, Monero became less inflationary than Bitcoin. Up until this point, where Bitcoin now became daily emission crossover date. Okay, so this is the fourth halving date. Remember I was telling you about this one? And okay, so the daily emission crossover rate, as you can see, the daily inflation is 0.00911, and here's 0.0108. And so yearly Monero inflation was 2.62, and the okay, let's scroll down. to right here, you can see Bitcoin crosses below XMR inflation rate yet again. So here we have on November 27th. So the exact happening dates aren't known, but these are like ballparked. You can see that the inflation rate right here was halved basically, because this represents the day where the 2020 halving happened. Even though we know it actually happened in May, and this calendar is saying it's going to happen in November, and that's because we don't know the exact times that these events are going to happen. It's kind of probabilistic based on the block times. But keep in mind that this spreadsheet was made a long time ago and is still accurate, because the whole point about blockchain is that the inflation schedule is known by everyone and agreed upon by everyone beforehand. So you can see right here, the chart says that at this point BTC crossed below, and this was after the 2020 halving. Before was 0.0979, and then after the halving was 0.00489. So this should be around May, not November. But if you scroll up here, you can see that right around here is where the daily inflation crossover date happened. And then the daily emission crossover rate was 1800 here, and then here it was 1575. So okay, what confused me before about this is it wasn't about the percentages, it was about the total emissions. But I feel like the actual emissions rate was a little higher, like right about here. I don't know why the chart said it was down there. It should have been actually right here on July 26, 2019. Okay, and so let's keep scrolling. Okay, so now we're getting to the more interesting stuff, aka things in the future. So this line right here represents the 2020 happening. Monero was at 1.48, and then at some point the daily inflation got halved for Bitcoin, leaving Monero with a higher inflation rate. But not to fear for Monero holders, for 39 days this was the case, and then Monero slipped below Bitcoin's inflation rate for, I think it's like 110 days, and then Bitcoin became less inflationary than Monero yet again. This is around March 2021. And so now we're getting closer to modern times. Right now it's January 1st, 2023, as of the point of me making this video. And so as you can see that at this point, April 29th, Monero emission is done. And now it's hit a point of essentially tail emissions, where now you can see the Monero emissions throughout time are basically fixed, and it's never going to drop below that, even though the Bitcoin emissions rate will still be subject to halvings. Anyway, so there's some discussion about why Monero would want to be less, or would want to be more inflationary than Bitcoin. And the main reason that's the case is because Bitcoin will reach a point where there's no inflation at some point in the 2100s. Monero will never reach that point. It will always reach a point where there's a non-zero positive inflation, but it will approach zero as t goes to infinity. But it will never actually be zero. Alright guys, so I want to talk about basically what I just showed you and whether or not any of that even matters. So most people would take a look at the information that I just showed them and would come to the conclusion that, well, it seems to me that they would say this. They would say, well, it seems to me that Bitcoin is permanently less inflationary than Monero from now until infinity, and that therefore Bitcoin would probably be a better investment than Monero. I think this is actually a sound reasoning. However, there is one thing that I think that branch of reasoning overlooks, and that is the fact that Monero right now essentially is one of the most transacted, or let me rephrase that, is one of the most popular cryptocurrencies used for actual transactions. And because of that, I think that it kind of is in a state right now similar to where Bitcoin was before it first hit $1,000 per Bitcoin. And within the next couple of years, we should be seeing the Monero to Bitcoin ratio closing up. I think it's around 1 to 100 right now, or slightly less, where it's a little bit more than 100 Moneros for one Bitcoin. But this is not financial advice, but if I were a betting man, I would say that over the next couple of years, that ratio will probably tighten up to maybe at least 0.01, maybe 0.015, or even 0.02. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on whether or not cryptocurrencies should use a tail emission or not, especially proof of work cryptocurrencies. Thank you, and have a good evening.